just like to say thanks, Dave, and welcome to the listeners. This is the first show I've ever hosted on a radio station, so expect amateurishness. Expect disaster. But if we don't get that, then it's all good. But one of the things that's really good about it is that I've lined up an amazing guest for my first show. He's a guy who's smart, he's funny, he's got so many strings to his bow because he's a composer, he's a trained scientist, a writer, a satirist, and an independent filmmaker. So I'd just like my guest, Johan, to introduce himself fully and tell us a little bit about his background, what his politics are, and where you're coming from, Johan, on the politics of the day, I suppose. So if you could just give us a little bit of talk about yourself.
So yeah, my main thing now is as an independent filmmaker, mostly right now editing and composing for film. Yeah, I've been doing that for many years, but I think things shifted a lot recently with the COVID thing, where I had a day job as a teacher, and language schools, as you can imagine, are one of the hardest hit because students are not flying anymore. We were dealing with a lot of Russians, so yeah, everything got shut down. So
as a teacher, I take it then that you're an Antifa member.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So that I go around with bike locks trying to knock out people every weekend.
I mean, it's a sad cliche, isn't it? I'm a former teacher as well, and it's sad the state we've got to in education, where you do actually think that someone who is a teacher is going to be hard left.
Yes, it's true. But I think there are some of us who, well, I think even just recent events of sort of waking sort of people up. But then again, some people are still stuck in that sort of hard left way of thinking as well, for sure.
Yeah, the woke world, for want of a better description.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So that's obviously, my posts and the kind of subjects I deal with. And that's what we'll be talking about today, really. But I think you can bring a really interesting perspective to this because you've got quite an unusual background, and also because of your scientific training. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yes, I've always had an interest in psychology, and I think it was around 2010 I went to study evolutionary psychology, which is a subset of psychology which looks at how traits have evolved. So I'm sure we're going to talk about it in more depth. But yes, this is sort of a way of understanding that, for example, we understand that animals have evolved not just their bodies, but their minds based on the environments that they have. So, for example, lions, they're a matriarchal society. So the territory that they own is sort of passed on to the daughters in the pride. The young males have to leave the pride in order to spend a bit of time in the wilderness, and then they're going to eventually try and take over a new pride when they're strong enough and they find some sort of teammates, and they'll be prowling around sort of. So we've evolved traits as well, like based on our environment and things like that. Yeah.
So there are inherent ways that the brain develops in response to environment.
Yes, in response to environment, and in response to, so that would be natural selection in response to environment, and sexual selection would be in response to what traits are going to be attractive for you in a mate, and therefore, if you choose a mate that has those traits, then those traits will then be passed down to your offspring. So it's both the environment and the mating market, if you like, that determines how we've evolved as a species. Yeah, and most of other animals as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a sort of combination of the environment you face and, if for want of a better phrase, dynamics and sexual politics.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you think that relates to politics, and how does the things you've learned as a scientist contradict or endorse the assumptions of politics today?
So yeah, I think one of the big sort of differences between left and right would be equality of opportunity and equality of outcome.
Yeah.
So equality of outcome is it's a way of using politics in order to make sure everyone has the same scenario. For example, wealth and all factors like this. But then equality of opportunity is more like we should all have an opportunity to climb the ladder, but we don't all have to be on the same level. And if you understand that. So if you're born, the moment you're born, if everything's all equal, then everything depends on the politics. So you can try and aim for equality of outcome. Whereas if you understand that actually these disparities are already taking place from the moment of conception, where one set of genes is going to meet with another set of genes, and it's going to have big variance in the qualities and the traits that those babies will have, then you kind of begin to think, well, actually, yes, we can't just engineer a society using politics entirely. There will be disparities, and disparities are natural. We can still set up a society that's fair, but you can't necessarily engineer it in.
I think that's one of the big problems, isn't it, with woke attitudes? This idea that you can create a utopia in which there's no disparity between any group and there's equality everywhere. The trouble is, every time that's been attempted, it tends to lead to things like death camps, and it has enormous negatives when you try to force people to have equal outcomes everywhere. I mean, in an economic sense, it just doesn't work, because some people will work harder than others naturally, and then they'll acquire more because they've worked harder. Some people will be luckier. Some people will have contacts. If you start trying to kind of legislate and control every difference between individuals so that you get an equal outcome, you can only really do that by tyranny and violence, ultimately. What's your take on that?
Yes, no, I definitely agree with all of that. And from following Peterson, I'm sure we both follow Peterson. Yeah, he talks a lot about the kulaks, and they were the more productive farmers, and how this is sort of being replicated now. You can see, for example, in admissions in the United States, they're actually penalizing the Asian Americans. That's the East Asian Americans in British terms, and so they are frequently on the top of the pile, and that could be that could be a combination of factors, and I think probably cultural is a big one, but I
think that the cultural factors have a huge impact, because if you look at all the social indicators that show how well different groups do in society, it's quite frequently the case that there are some very obvious cultural ideas that all the top performing groups share. And white people, as I've said before, aren't on average at the top of this, that they tend to be in the middle. But the groups that do really well, and this is true in the UK and in the US and elsewhere, the groups that do really well in Western society tend to be ones who have a strong work ethic, who have a cultural respect for education. So they have a series of positive means that tend to be followed in those societies, like strong, close family bonds, etc. So that is a case of people choosing an environment that leads to a success, wouldn't you say?
Yes. So the solution would then be to identify what is working in these cultures and try and bring them into the other cultures, rather than what's coming across from the left now, which is affirmative action, which does no one any favors, because the students who are, like I said, the East Asians in the cases of Harvard, are being penalized, so they need a much higher SAT score. But then the whichever ones are on the lower end of that, they're going to be seen as a token, whatever race they are, or for men and women in STEM subjects, which is science, technology, engineering, and maths. For the women in STEM, this is not going to help if there is a if there is a sexist belief amongst some members. If you're going to push them up by reducing the score they need, it's not actually going to help them, because people will just say, "Oh, that's a token woman," for example, in STEM. And
if anything, it will increase resentment, won't it?
Increase resentment and increase the sort of the stereotype they're trying to break. Yeah.
So it has exactly the opposite impact to the one that the policy is supposed to create.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So one of the things that obviously this happens in gender, and it happens in race as well, where we're told that certain groups, society is structured against them. But would you say on the whole that's not true?
I don't believe in structural racism, because it would have to be what's called discerning racism. So in some, for example, in football, if you're black, you've got a huge advantage. Why is society giving an advantage in that situation? If you're Indian or South Asian, if you're in the field of medicine, then society is discerningly racist towards you and against you in some other areas. So South Asians are terrible at football, that's, I would say that's probably a genetic thing as well, but that's not.
I mean, my first show and the first sweeping racist statement isn't from me, so I feel that I'm ahead.
Okay.
On this,
you are.
But maybe explain your cultural background a little bit, so people have an idea of where you're coming from there.
Yes, sure. So my dad is Malaysian. My mum is Guyanese, which is in South America.
Yeah. Often
mixed up with Ghana, but no. So Guyana in South America, and that's more like a West Indian culture than a Latino culture.
Right.
But my roots are from India, and I'm London born, just outside London. So
you're really the multicultural dream.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm boringly Anglo-Saxon, so I don't have any of that. I can't draw in to justify my arguments that I'm in some kind of group that needs protection.
Right.
So, but then it's not just white people who are negatively impacted by this whole kind of woke concentration on race, is it? As you've mentioned, it's detrimental to high-performing ethnic minority groups, isn't it?
Yeah, to the high performers, and to people who are, it's. We need to go back to the classical liberal idea of the individual. If there is an individual of any who has an interest in this thing and an ability, then we should just allow them to do that. But we don't need to prop up people or like the BBC spending £100 million on diversity in the BBC.
Yeah,
that's not. I don't think that's needed, and it creates resentment. But actually, if you look at the numbers, there's actually the I don't like these acronyms, but the BAME population in on the BBC is actually higher than the proportion. So when you do these initiatives and then the data doesn't show. There's an interesting channel I watch called Victor Kravchenko, and he goes into a lot of detail about how the statistics of all this, and they're all readily available. And yes, it's a very peculiar form of institutional racism. As I said, that's discerning, but yeah.
It's and the strangest thing about it for me is that it spreads the message that the way to respond if you have difficulties in life is essentially to whine as much as possible and to make your group and you as an individual as antisocial as possible, because then you'll be responded to with extra perks and privileges, because people will say the only possible reason that they could be making a fuss like this is because they have been mistreated and they have been oppressed. So let's reward those people behaving antisocially with extra investment, extra funds, lower scores required on tests. And at the same time, you're saying to the people who've done really well, groups that have integrated very well into Western society and are making a massive success of it, regardless of their background, you're saying to those individuals and those groups, we're going to penalise you for doing well. Now, if anyone translated this into individual behaviour, and you kind of raised two kids, and you raised one of them that every time he did something good, you hit him, and the other one, every time he did something bad, you gave him a chocolate, the end result would be pretty terrible, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it sounds disastrous. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So would you agree that they're following a kind of disastrous set of policies?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's not. I can't see a positive outcome, and it's definitely deepening the divide that they're claiming to be trying to heal. And I think Lawrence Fox made a very good point when he was on with a Question Time, when he said, it's not about my race. I believe in MLK. MLK said it better than anyone else, to judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, and that should go for all traits, no matter what they are. But yeah,
absolutely, and that was something that was emphasised by Trump recently as well, wasn't it? I mean, his recent speeches have very much pushed the idea that the right now is supporting classical liberal ideas that Martin Luther King held, and actually the left is saying no, judge people by their race and their background and their orientation sexually and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, so I think Trump was very good to push back on the critical race theory ideas, which is basically, yes, it's a sort of let's divide people based on their race, and going back to, in some university campuses in America, they're trying to go back to segregation. I think one of the great things for female musicians was classical musicians was the blind auditions, where if there is a stereotype that men are better than women at music, well, let's get rid of that by putting up a board and just listening to the quality of the music that they're playing.
Yep,
that's great. And now there are calls to reverse all of these, these fantastic moves that I'm sure some of the left have really contributed to those moves. But
so
now
why would people want that? I'm conscious of time, and I'll ask Dave about going to our first song soon.
Okay, sure.
But why would people, if you could quickly explain, why are people arguing that having a blind audition is a bad idea? Because you'd think automatically a blind audition, nobody can impose any prejudice on you. They're just hearing the music, or they're just reading a CV that hasn't got your name on it. And when it's blind in that sense, they can't impose any judgment on your background. So surely that's the fairest thing to do.
Yeah, that's a common sense approach. But yes, I think they're trying to say with the identity politics coming into the institutions, they're trying to say you really have to consider all of these factors when you're picking. So if it's a straight white male, then that's going to be a big X. And
it's just like they immediately lead him for a special corridor outside again. So,
basically, something like that. That actually happened to me in real life when we arrived in India for the first time. We went to the 6-star hotel, and they just led us through the hotel and out the back door because we just looked like we were just backpackers. But anyway, that's a side story.
So the you faced an instant case of white racism towards you in India.
Yes, exactly.
We're going to go back live with Johan and with Dan this morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world.
Hello, everybody. We're back again. That sounded a little bit like Joanne rather than Johan, though. So I know Johan will be deeply offended by that.
Did I say Joanne?
As male.
Did I say Joanne? I'm sorry, Margaret. If I got that wrong, I'm really sorry.
But well, I mean, we can all identify as what we like now, can't we? So you know, no matter what your physical reality is, you are what you decide to be.
Well, if you see me sat here, mate, I'm in a nightie with flip-flops and a hairnet and a balaclava on.
Okay, that's why you're not on the video then.
Exactly, yeah. Never go on camera when you look like me, mate. I look like roadkill.
But so we were talking a little bit. I mean, that leads in nicely to an aspect of evolutionary psychology that we mentioned in passing, but didn't really go into detail on.
Yeah.
So that's the blank slate theory.
Yeah.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that is and why woke politics seems to be believing in it.
Sure. So yeah, if I give so in Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, he goes into great detail, and he actually states that, you know, he really believes he shouldn't have to write this book. You know, the idea that evolution has shaped our way of thinking. But yeah, he wrote The Blank Slate and popularized it in terms of a critique of the idea. So
yeah.
So the blank slate would be, yes, everything. So evolutionary psychologists, they would say, well, biology plays a key role, but obviously environment also plays a role. So it's not a negation of the role of environment, whereas many of the social sciences, they are based on the idea that everything is a blank slate. So you can, so everything is a social construct, basically.
So that would be things like your identity as a boy or a girl is this idea that your society has and then essentially forces on you, and you have to conform to all these stereotypes about what being a boy is or what being a girl is.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason we have different attitudes towards boys and girls is because they're culturally imposed.
Right, yes. So take aggression, for example. Aggression is considerably higher in boys, and it's associated with testosterone.
Yeah.
But you would also find that in gender atypical girls, so girls who are not typical. They would also enjoy rough and tumble play, for example, which is a very boy typical activity. Whereas, girls just don't, they don't understand it. They don't engage in it unless they are gender atypical. So yeah.
So and have you got any idea of percentages of that? How many people in a given population are likely to have physiological or chemical or differences that are inherent to them that would explain them behaving in ways that aren't typical for their gender?
I don't know the exact numbers for gender atypical.
I've put you on the spot there, haven't I?
No. It's that's a very broad category. So, whereas, yes, I do know that the percentage of people with gender dysphoria and trans is 1%.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very strong form of being gender atypical.
Yeah.
Whereas a tomboy, for example, is a girl who enjoys boys' activities. Yes, I guess the word is camp, or some males are like that. But yes,
I'm only like that in my voice.
Yeah, okay.
Everything else is extremely macho.
Okay.
I want to get that out there straight away.
Sure.
That almost sounds like protesting too much, doesn't it?
It does a little bit.
But I mean,
I've got to tell the listeners as well, mate. You sat there with a vase of roses at the side of you as well, aren't you?
I am.
So it's the very butch side of for doing an interview this today. and those curtains behind you, I mean, they're lovely. I mean, if everybody could see what I'm seeing here this morning.
I know what stuns me is that Johan has a very professional looking mic in front of him.
Oh yes.
And it's like you've done this a million times before.
No, never done it before. I've just got, this is my mic for my you should be hearing my the fourth song will be one of my tracks that I I composed and sang on. So yeah, it's musical Mike, really. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
That explains it, because I'm feeling Mike envy here.
I was going to say, Amazon's gone crazy this weekend with deliveries.
But I mean, the whole thing about boys and girls is anyone who's a parent sees these kind of natural divisions arise through no influence from you whatsoever as a parent. You know, my boy likes trains and dinosaurs and cars and running around and being loud and jumping off things. You know, they're all things that you would, if you typically said, what would a little boy do? They're all things that my little boy does.
Yeah.
And my little girl, who's 2 years younger, my boy's 4 and my little girl's 1.5. She wants to clean things up and tidy things the right way. Literally, this is not me kind of patriarchally saying go and tidy that little girl. You know, she just starts doing stuff like that.
Yes.
I mean, what do you think about that? You're a father as well.
Yes.
Do you see these kind of natural differences yourself?
So yeah, in terms of my own observations, my daughter is she's very female typical. She loves the princess stuff. She also is into science and geography and things like this. And yeah, we just observe what she likes and encourage that, you know. But it's not, you know, we do have some trucks around, some other things, because my cousin is her cousin is a boy, and you know, she's very clear. These are my cousins, you know. These are not mine, you know. So
but that's another thing that kids have a very inbuilt sense of, isn't it? Like all kids are natural capitalists, aren't they? They all kind of like, this is mine. This is very definitely mine.
Yes.
You know,
yes,
there are no. You know, this is what makes me laugh sometimes when they talk about, you know, the innocence of a child, because it's not really there. But, you know, you see children fighting about possessions, and that most of them are like Gordon Gekko. In their, you know.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, why do you think people are ascribing to this blank slate theory if it doesn't match up with the evidence?
So I just had a point to finish on with the other one, and then I'll get to this one.
Sure,
So the interesting thing is, yes, a lot of parents are trying to be kind of trendy, and they're sort of following this trend of trying to make their children either gender neutral. And there's this new phenomenon in America called babies, which is the idea of bringing them up until they're 4. When they're like so mature that they can choose their gender.
So 4-year-old is definitely the rational age of decision making.
Exactly, you know? Yeah. And so that is a very, very strange phenomenon. And there's also a phenomenon of actually trying to make your child gender atypical. And I believe this is, well, it stems from the blank slate model, but it is also a form of vanity in a way, or attention seeking, if you like, where it's like, you know, my child is different and my child is gender atypical. And then what they would do is, you know, it's becoming kind of common, is if they are a boy who's gender atypical, they will really like amp up the sort of feminine side and make him ultra like a drag queen almost, and I think this is kind of worrying, whereas they would never do that if they had a daughter who was, you know, feminine, you know. So it's like a caricature almost. And
so they're trying to force kids into roles, which is exactly what they claim society at large does.
Yes. So when it's if you do that to a woman, that's really bad if it's over like feminized. Whereas, if it's a boy who is, and this is where a lot of the work of Deborah So, I've just finished her book, The End of Gender, comes in, and it's a fantastic book. And she goes on to show that actually when it's a gender atypical boy, if you leave him and just let him grow up, he will often just become a gay man, and happily gay in his thinking, and he won't have to go through complex surgeries or hormones in order to become a woman, in order to then be what they call heteronormative, which is the idea that you're attracted to the opposite sex.
Yeah.
Whereas now, so the generations before, gay men and lesbians would have been able to just go through it and then eventually come to terms with who they are. Whereas now it's like if girls or boys are showing gender atypical traits, there is this almost like a pressure on them to start this social transitioning, which will then lead to a more of a hormonal transition, which will be hormones for the rest of your life, basically. And it's
so woke parents really at the extreme of this. If they are behaving in an extreme manner, trying to manifest an identity within their child that the child doesn't naturally have, they're doing everything that they say that normal society does, and then some. And I mean, that can only cause psychological harm to a child, can't it?
Yes, I think it's a sort of form of gaslighting for sure for these children, and it's very worrying. And just to go a bit deeper into the evolutionary side, day-old or 2-day-old babies will actually boys will show a preference for mechanical objects, and girls will show a preference to faces. And these traits are even apparent in our distant relatives, vervet monkeys and rhesus monkeys, where if you give the girls and the boys these toys, the girls will still prefer female typical toys, and the boys will prefer male typical toys. And
that's amazing that works in monkeys, isn't it?
It is really amazing, yeah.
I mean, I was showing a preference for large breasts almost a month ago. But and that stayed with me. No amount of social conditioning has managed to remove that. So one of the other things you wanted to talk about was a phrase that you hear every now and then, which is "born this way."
Yes.
So can you explain how that's used and how that relates to what else we've been talking about?
Sure. So yes, the one of the strongest arguments for gay rights since the civil rights movement is the "born this way" argument, which is that the gay community, gays are born this way. It's a biological trait.
Yeah.
And research really does show that this is the case. And there is there's some work by Ray Blanchard, which is called Fraternal Birth Order, and it shows that actually, because of the in the womb, the Y chromosome, further down the line, if a mother has more boys, further down the line, they're more likely to be gay because there's a resistance towards that body. So, and so yes, I think if someone has an immutable characteristic, and you judge them on that, that's rightly seen as a bad thing. And
but let me just respond to that one.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's a really interesting point. Because what seems to be happening is that the left or the woke or the almost the mainstream now seems to act as if the right or conservative opinion is judging people all the time by immutable characteristics, and they aren't.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find shocking about all this is that if you look at what people are saying and what they're doing today, not what traditional attitudes were 50 years ago or 100 years ago, it's exactly the other way round. Because I'm not here to judge anyone, and I wouldn't think many conservatives do, for immutable characteristics. If someone says to me they're born gay, I'm fine with that. I've got no problem with that. But the left is saying let's have a problem with people who are born white, right. Or let's have a problem with people who are born straight, and somehow that their very straightness, their very whiteness, is a threat to others and is an oppression of others. So it's strange, isn't it, the way it's kind of shifted around in culture. That idea, and Born This Way illustrates that, because I don't think there's very many right-wing people who are now saying to gays, you shouldn't have the things you do should be criminalised. There's not many people doing that, is there?
No. So yeah, with the so yeah, going back to the blank slate. So with the this ties in very much with the gender is on a spectrum concept.
Yeah.
Which it's like they want to have it both ways. So gender is on the spectrum, but you still have L's and you still have G's and you still have B's. So in that sense, you can't have gender is on a spectrum and say that this person is a same sex attracted or this person is opposite sex attracted, because that those are opposing concepts, you know.
Yeah. So really, they want it both ways, because they say, you know, if you identify as lesbian, then that's a firm identity that should be respected,
right? For
example. But if you identify as straight, you're on a spectrum and a sliding scale, and really you're not telling the truth about your sexuality, because you will be partly attracted to the same sex.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's contradictory, and so for me, I'm very much against the gender as a spectrum argument. I believe gays should be fine to be attracted to the same sex. Same with lesbians, and straight people should too. But as soon as you create 100 genders, which the BBC has done recently in one of their articles, you're basically, if this spreads, then you're really closing the door behind you, because then you're going to prevent in countries like which really are homophobic, in South America, in the Middle East, in Asia, you're going to put forward an argument that says that actually, no, you're kind of choosing this, and that won't actually help them. That's kind of closing the door behind for those gays who are really, you know, when I was teaching, I had students who were clearly gay and they were from Saudi Arabia, and you just think, wow, you know, how are you gonna deal with that when you get back, or are you gonna have to just like leave or whatever, you know?
So, well, that's another thing, isn't it? It's low-hanging fruit what the woke in Western societies go for, because they're constantly. I mean, one of the things the gay rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. There's lots of things I would disagree with the things he says, but I respect the fact that he will actually go to these far more oppressive countries where gay rights are restricted and comment to them. You know, he will go up to a Robert Mugabe and say about gay rights rather than up to a Boris Johnson.
Right.
You know, and there's a noticeable thing that they're campaigning in the places where those rights are already established.
Yeah.
Because that's not dangerous for them, is it? There's no personal cost.
No, and it's the same with feminism as well.
Yeah, feminism, because I mean, you know, there's 100-year history of developing female rights in the West that doesn't exist in many other parts of the world.
And I guess that would bring us into another sort of biological trait, which is kind of, we alluded to with the mechanical toys and the dolls, for example, the preference for children, which is that, yes, men prefer working with things and females prefer working with people. And again, this is a Peterson point that I got from him. But yeah, it's according to the feminist argument, if we are sort of blank slates, then the more you break down the barriers between men and women, the more equality we'll see in fields like engineering and computer science will be like 50-50, and nursing and other and medicine, like doctors, that will also be 50-50. But actually what you're seeing is that in Sweden, a place like that, where they've really done the most to bring down those barriers, you actually see bigger gender differences. So, you know, more men will be going towards these systemizing, fields where, computer science, I've done a little bit of coding and it is quite tedious. You just got to sit there in a quiet place and just type away. You don't want to be socializing and conversing. Whereas there are fields like medicine and nursing, which, the numbers of women going into those fields is really high because, and then this is a study by Lee Jassim, which shows that for women who have very high numeracy abilities, that it's also paired with a very high sort of linguistic and communicative ability. So if you have both of those, you wouldn't necessarily need to be like locked away in a room and coding or whatever. Whereas
anyone who's met a male computer programmer knows that it's not necessarily gay.
Exactly. That's the point. Yeah. So that the men, they will have the high they will have the high systemizing numeracy, whereas but the men who have those, it won't be paired with. So if you've got more opportunities, why would you choose coding? So then this brings us back to the affirmative action, which again I disagree with, and yeah.
But I mean, the net impact as well is anyone can see that if you lower standards to allow people who wouldn't be naturally gifted in that area to do well. If you lower standards because you've got this ideological fixation on getting the same numbers of people from completely different groups into a position, lowering those standards is going to have a negative impact on the product, essentially, isn't it? I mean, if people could jettison me onto a computer programming course, and I must be gender atypical in that sense because I'm absolutely mechanically incompetent with everything. So if somebody put me on a computer studies course and then lowered the requirements for that course so that I could fit in there, the work that I'm going to produce afterwards is going to be inferior to the work of others who got there naturally.
Yeah. So yes, you're definitely bringing down the standard, but then that's kind of ties back in with the communist ideas and what was going on in the Soviet Union, and it led to. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to lead to starvation, but it did lead to some pretty bad things back in the day, and I'm sure it's going to have similar impacts as well nowadays. Yeah,
but because Soviet or Cuban industry, etc., was renowned for high quality, wasn't it? And
yeah,
I mean they did pretty well with tanks in World War II, but other than that, I can't really see. And maybe the kind of battle to put a man on the moon, they didn't do too bad. But the non-glib response to that is if you're forcing people to do things they're not naturally good at, you're going to get a crappy result, and socialist societies do that a lot, don't they? Yeah. So okay, one of the things we've touched a little bit on trans rights and how they relate to this blank slate idea. One of the things there is there's a very aggressive side to this, isn't there? Because if you look at someone like J.K. Rowling, sort of famous and respected at one stage anyway, and generally quite leftist herself, and she got a lot of abuse over trans rights, didn't she?
Yes, she. So she's what they would call a TERF, which is a trans exclusionary radical feminist. But yes, she's been in a lot of trouble for stating very, very biological facts. But I think are we going to the music now? I think.
Yeah, should we go to the music?
Yeah, we run out of time, boys. We're that busy chatting away, we run out of time. We've got 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left. Wow. So you didn't get all your music choices.
That's all right.
Maybe we finish up. There's just one thing we haven't covered that I would like to comment on because I love it, and that's your Guru Shack stuff. Could you just explain that very briefly?
Great. Yeah, no, it's just some satire that I've created. I work with another writer. I'm not sure if he wants me to mention his name now, but he knows who he is. And yeah, we've started off with some Twitter stuff, but we did do some videos. If you want to find that, you can see that on Twitter at Guru Shack TV.
And I would recommend anybody to check that out because Johan's Guru Shack stuff is really funny. And it's taking the P out of the idea of a guru, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, kind of, and kind of wokeness as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's Titania McGrath with a different twist on it.
Exactly. Yeah.